Roberts Robinson Chevrolet Buick GMC presents Kevin Keatsman Has Issues. Shop, click, drive at robertsrobinson.com.
Well, it only took about 100 of you to point out that we had an operator error by the host of the podcasts on Tuesday afternoon's podcast concerning the NCAA and college athletics being at a crossroads. I'll explain to you what I did. And let me just first say that I am amazed it has taken me this many months to screw this up. I don't have a producer. I don't have an editor. I do this all myself. And I got all involved in this thing yesterday, and it was a little tricky because there was a lot of editing to it, and we're going to insert this piece and do this and do that. I had saved stuff in a different file, and I use an editing program called Audacity. And Audacity, it's like anything else. You can leave a lot of different windows open at one time. And so I had it ready to go to insert the Chris Stigall chunk into my thoughts about the NCAA and college athletics being at a crossroads. And I know I inserted it in there because I remember editing it, and I know I put it together. And I think I had it up in a window, but I didn't save it under the file name, which was, I just export as, I call it monologue. And so I hadn't done that yet. And so it was open in a different screen. And then when I finished, I was done with the editing, I minimized it, and I went through Audacity, and I go, okay, now it's time to publish the episode. And I write the headline, and I write the little paragraph about I write the paragraph about the podcast. This is really pretty funny. I apologize, but it's pretty funny. And I write the paragraph, the whole deal, and then I go through a different way, and it says publish now. I hit publish, and it says go to file, and I go to file, and I pull up the episode that I had already downloaded, but it was not the one that had inserted the Chris Stigall piece in it. It was left in a window that had not been saved. And so when I hit publish, I sent you what was my original thing that I had saved, and I never saved the final edit. So I found it, and I'd saved it. I had it. I feel ridiculous, and I apologize to everyone. It must have sounded very odd to listen to that podcast and hear me throw to the chunk of me and Chris Stigall on his outstanding radio show, and then not hear that chunk, and then hear me say, there it was. And I can't go back and listen to the entire episode every time. It's way too time consuming. But what I do is I go through every 2 or 3 minutes, I bounce around and I listen to make sure there's no static, that it's clean, that it sounds good, and things like that. And apparently I didn't get close enough to the point where I threw to that thing. Well, I did, because I was done with it. Never mind that. I did that, and I was done with it. I didn't save it properly. The one I had saved properly to be published by Podbean was one that did not have Chris Stigall, and I never saved over that. So I'm really sorry. So we're going to have a laugh or two this time. And hey, it'll give you something different to listen to, I guess, if that's what you like. And you can hear me making fun of myself. I made a mistake. I screwed up. And thank you to all of you for pointing out to me, where was Chris Stigall in that podcast? You tossed to it, and we never heard it. So this time, I get it right. Here it is. We were talking NCAA, the Supreme Court ruling, and I was on Chris Stigall's show. And here, there's much more. If you go to the KCMO website, you can hear the entire podcast of my entire interview. It's probably 3 or 4 times this long. I was on for half an hour. But this is the piece about the NCAA, and it starts with Chris, my friend, Chris Stigall.
Kevin, what does it mean? Here's what I generally know. Most sports fans, collegiate sports fans, are not fans of the NCAA. There's no goodwill left with fans in the NCAA, and I've heard some say that this is tantamount to the beginning of the end for the organization generally. Although, to be very candid, I don't really understand the nuts and bolts of this decision and what involved. So that's why you're here. Take it away.
Okay, well, I'm not a legal scholar, so interpreting all the legalese of what the Supreme Court has decided is the tricky part. But essentially what they've said is that colleges cannot limit the amount of compensation for education that they give to student athletes. So here's where this all changed a few years ago. They started giving a stipend to athletes. They said, you can't work. We're saying you can come to college. Everything's free. Typical college education at KU, K-State, or Missouri, or what, is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars if you're from out of state. So you're getting all kinds of compensation to come play your sport. But you can't get a part-time job, so if you want to take a girl out on a date and go to get a pizza or whatever, you don't have any money for that. We're going to start giving you about, $3,000 or $4,000 a semester or whatever it is, pocket money. So they started giving all these football and basketball players pocket money to have on them. Once they did that, they opened the floodgates for all kinds of legal challenges that you cannot limit what you pay us, that each school can decide what kind of money they want to give us. The way I interpret this is they're saying you can't limit the education-based compensation for student athletes, and part of that is a stipend. And Justice Kavanaugh wrote in his concurrence that you can't limit the amount of pay that you give to these players. So I interpret that as if you're Alabama football and you want to pay your players $100,000 a year each to have pocket money, you can do that now. That's the way I interpret it. And if that's the case, there is no enforcement by the NCAA. There's nothing they can do. The courts are knocking them down at every turn. So I understand why people are saying this is the beginning of the end for the NCAA. I'm not smart enough to know what's going to happen. I can just tell you, if you like a level playing field between schools, this is not good. And I don't think there's anything good here for KU, K-State, or Missouri, which is probably most important to most of the listeners, except for maybe Kansas basketball, because they could be in a situation where if they've got a couple of boosters with a bunch of deep pockets, they might be willing to funnel all kinds of money to basketball players to play at Kansas.
So your interpretation is the wealthiest schools with the wealthiest, deepest pockets will obviously retain the best talent, and those without the deep pockets will have subpar talent.
That's correct. That's what I think. I think that will eventually happen, and I think it could lead to, let's say, the 24 biggest schools, whatever those would be, or the 32 biggest schools in America, branching off on their own and saying, why do we need everybody else? We're just going to go do our own thing. There is no NCAA. There's no governing body. Major League Baseball is 30 teams. The NFL is 32 teams. Why wouldn't college football say, let's get 24 or 32 teams and have our own massive college league here and keep all the money to ourselves without sharing it with 100 other schools?
Wow. So like a super league, kind of like they flirted with doing soccer in Europe.
Why not? Why not? And where do you think K-State, KU, and Missouri would be if football does that? They wouldn't be in those 20.
Walk it out.
They wouldn't be in those 24 or 32, not as football schools. Kansas might be able to get into a 24-league super basketball league or something like that.
But does that mean more opportunity for athletes who are sort of, mid-level or on the come, but not, quite superstars? I mean, would that open opportunities, or would that dry money up and maybe some colleges would just collapse financially?
Well, it's so complicated. It would leave other schools in some sort of a middle class where their budgets wouldn't be the same. There would be scholarships lost clearly because they wouldn't have the revenue that they had. But, what's missing from this discussion all the time, I always talk about like golfers or baseball players. So let's take Kansas, for example. At Kansas, the golfers and baseball players have fractions of scholarships. So they get like a quarter of a scholarship to go play golf. But they love it because they get to go to Maui and play golf, and Scottsdale, Arizona in the winter, and do all these cool things. They're like, this is the greatest thing of my life. I'm getting part of my education paid for. I get all the free golf I want. I get all this swag. I get to travel around and play golf all over the world. They think it's the greatest thing ever. But at the same time, they're jealous of the basketball and football players who get much more. They get full scholarships. They get all this housing paid for. They get $5,000 stuffed in their pocket to take their girlfriend out on dates and stuff like that. There's an upper and a middle class within these athletic departments. And now we're just going to widen that gap? I mean, I thought that's what we were all about, was leveling the playing field on stuff like this. You're going to widen the gap between athletes at universities where the football players are going to have everything and nobody else is going to have anything.
And the NCAA then becomes irrelevant. Why?
Well, they're all about setting guidelines and rules for what schools can and cannot do in order to level the playing field, to make it even for all schools. We have rules for, let's say, 120 Division I schools around the country. The rules are all the same. You can only pay them this much. You can only give them this much. You can only practice them this many days. You can only do this. You can only do that. That's gone. I read a story in Forbes that the quarterback, Spencer Rattler at Oklahoma this year, if it's legal in Oklahoma for him to sell his name, image, and likeness and make money off of his name, he will make $700,000 this year as the quarterback at Oklahoma. That's just on social media with endorsements like the Kardashians do.
Kevin Kietzman is host of the fantastic podcast I hope you subscribe to and listen to each day. Kevin Kietzman Has Issues, based right here out of our hometown of Kansas City. Kev, thanks as always, my man.
Okay, so there it is. I think I got it right this time. There is Chris Stigall and me talking about the NCAA. So I appreciate all of you for pointing that out. I'm a little disappointed Miss Jessica didn't hear that, but she was playing, she has this like ladies golf league thing on Tuesday nights, so she didn't hear it or listen to it. I don't like going back and re-listening to myself. Although earlier this week, I did that walking my dog. I take him for about an hour walk or longer. And when I was walking my dog, I did it. And I listen. And what I listen for is not, I know what the content is. And I know I've said, I'm listening for tendencies that I have that I don't like. And I've had a tendency recently to say, right? You know what I'm talking about? Right? You know, right? And I need to stop saying that. Or maybe once a podcast, but not a bunch of podcasts. Right? That was a joke. That was a joke. I'm doing my best to not say it. When you hear it, it's very natural to say it. It's part of the lexicon in America now. Everybody says it. So we talk like that, but it doesn't belong in the podcast 20 times. There you go. That's the kind of stuff I do. That's the inside world of a guy who works in his boxer shorts and a t-shirt and does a podcast every day. Love what I do. Enjoy what I do. I'm so thrilled that all of you listen, and I thank all of you for pointing out to me that I'm a complete and total screw-up. The fact that I made it 10 months without a giant omission like that, I've had some mistakes. I've had glitches. We've had some electronic sounds, some things that weren't to my liking. But I don't think I've ever tossed to something that wasn't there. This isn't easy. I'm just telling you, it's not easy. You ever make a mistake on a computer? You ever do that? Yeah. So I haven't done that until now. And thank you and my apologies to Chris Stigall. If you were listening to the podcast wanting to hear that and it was just not there, my apologies, sir. You're a good man, and I appreciate you having me on anytime you do. So there it is, my appearance yesterday on the Chris Stigall Show. This is Kevin Keatsman Has Issues, and one of my issues is sometimes I just screw up.
Thanks for listening to Kevin Keatsman Has Issues, presented by Roberts Robinson Chevrolet Buick GMC. To get exclusive patrons-only podcasts, receive a weekly newsletter, and attend in-person patrons-only parties, visit kkhasissues.com and become a patron today. This has been a production of Crooked Tail Media Incorporated.